Alcohol is such an accepted addiction in our world. Legal drugs can be used the same way. They can either be used in a very healthy environment.
I believe alcohol is a good medicine for some things, and I think cannabis is a better medicine for most things. Every time I had hit that moment in my trying to become a sober person, that's when I would fail.
Welcome to the Derelict Podcast. For the disparaged, depleted, and delinquent souls trying to find our way, we're talking about the scary part of the journey, where we don't know how it'll end. Let's be free to face our fucking failures in real time as the most unadulterated, truest version of who we are. No sugarcoating. Welcome to the shit show, you derelict.
Hey, Derelicts, it's Josh Tomeoni here with another episode of the Derelict Podcast, and we have another special guest today, and we are going to be talking about sobriety today, so get excited. It's going to be good stuff. But we're going to actually make it interesting because a lot of the times, and I'm actually going to talk to Ken about this in a moment here, a lot of the times when I hear sobriety, it just sounds sober and boring and everything else. So we'll talk about that here in a second. But first, let me introduce my guest, Ken Cox. Thank you for being here, Ken.
Thank you for having me, Josh. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, so Ken and I met and started talking online, and I found out that he was the author of a brand new book called Reclaim Sobriety, the 12 Rounds of Sobriety. And I didn't even realize that this was the reference, but Ken started talking about the fact that he owns a boxing gym as well, and there's 12 rounds in boxing. So I'm really interested to hear about that because I was just telling him right before we hit record that I'm in the process right now of exploring boxing for myself because I just thought it sounded fun, which I don't know, fun is the right word. It sounded good for me. But what I know so far about the book, and we're going to talk about this more in a second, Ken, and I want to hear more about your story behind this. So Ken not only is an author, he's also an entrepreneur. He owns multiple companies. Like I just mentioned, there's a boxing gym. He has authored many books so far. We're going to be focusing on the sobriety book, but there's other ones. So please check it out. In the show notes right now, there is a link to Ken and his book. So go check it out right now. One of the things that I wanted to chat with you about today, Ken, is just, you obviously have a story because no one writes a book about sobriety without having a story. You also must have some sort of either opinion or insight or something else that came across instead of just telling everybody to go to AA, and deal with their 12 steps there, or any anonymous program. They're all basically the same. It's just the difference between alcohol or drugs or sex or overeating or whatever it is, right? But it's the same 12 steps. But there's something obviously unique that you found incorporating boxing into this, and I really want to start to address that. So just real quick for the audience, here's essentially what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about men specifically, as we usually do on this podcast, and specifically about how men can reclaim sobriety in their daily lives. But I think before we even jump into that, and before we even jump into your story, Ken, maybe it would just be good for us to define a couple of terms. Like, okay, let's just start with, how do you even define sobriety? Can we start with that?
And I have a whole definition that I've written about sobriety, and I don't believe that sobriety is the lack of alcohol or drugs in your life. That's misery. Right. So if you identify as an addict and you're just living a life of abstinence, for me, that was a miserable existence. I was in this constant conflict in life. It was exhausting. I had to, and then this is years of triggers. And, I don't know if I lied to myself or if I was honestly on this path to what I was trying to do is get to moderation, right? In my head, it was, I have this relationship with alcohol that it's my best friend. It is there for me whenever I needed it. And that was every day, all day. But when the doctors and the judges and everybody in my life and my wife and my children are like, you can't do this anymore and live with us. Right. You can't live in society and do this anymore. You can't live in our home anymore if you continue down this path. It became obvious to me that moderation was not going to work and I couldn't be miserable at all. So I took and just revisited the entire process for myself. And when my mindset changed from I'm not an alcoholic, like literally a light switch going on or off. When I just decided I'm not an alcoholic, I'm now going to live a sober life. Everything changed, like
Wow. So
drastic.
let's back up for a second, because I do want to get to your story here. So what led you to, well, let me maybe before we talk about what led to it, what did alcohol give you? In other words, there was a reason you used it, right? There was a reason you drank.
Yeah. So,
What did it give you?
and I've been to thousands of groups, and I see myself in a lot of these groups. I don't see myself in everybody in those groups. I was an extremely high functioning alcoholic. I missed my first day of school in second grade because I was too drunk to go. I've been drinking since little bitty kid, right? Dad give me a sip of my stepdad, but drinking stepdad's beer at 3 years old as you're walking out to him. My first time in AA, I was 13. I got arrested with a large amount of cannabis in a stolen car, or a borrowed car, actually. Is how it ended up being in court. So that was my first run with AA, and it did nothing for me. It was miserable, and it was in the 80s, so it was coupled with a program called Tough Love. Fast forward to years of issues and problems, but as an executive, alcohol helped me close deals. It helped me get deals. It helped me get leads, right? I could be at the bars and the happy hours and the mixers and all those things. I could network really amazingly. And for me, alcohol.
So why though? What about it helped you close those deals? Because obviously you can be in a bar and not drink. What was it about the alcohol specifically, would you say?
Lowers your inhibitions, right? You can make those conversations really easily, right? So you can approach people way less restrictive. The social lubricant that adds, a lot of my clients would expect me to take them out to the bars and throw these lavish parties and do all this crazy stuff, right? And that was when you do that with people and you're kind of in the trenches with them, right? You gain I'm not going to say it's a healthy bond, but you get a bond, right? And it's an instant bond with people that you can create, and it helps you close the deals, right? And going to the happy hours after work, right, to all those things help you network and be in front of people. For a long time, for me, it was awkward to not have a drink, right? The conversation of not drinking was just really, really challenging. Until
for anyone that's listening or watching that's ever gone through this period, like I've definitely gone through this period as well. Try going and hanging out anywhere at night, because it's probably a bar, because where else do you hang out at night? And then, I'll just give you an example right now, because I just went out and played pool last night, and I've been getting into pool again the last couple of months, and I love it. I used to play it 20 years ago, really haven't touched it since, but found a couple of friends that like playing, and I'll go and play every once in a while. And it's always a bar, and it's always a pool place and everything else, right? And I'm now known for a couple of these places that I go, even though I've only been going for a couple of months, as the guy who gets club soda and lime. Like, they'll literally just bring it to me. And it's just been a joke, for months now. And I got to be honest, man, like, I wish it wasn't. Like, I wish I didn't care, but I got to be honest, when I started doing that, it made me feel less than. It just does sometimes. It makes me feel like, oh man, I'm not part of the crew. I'm not part of the club. And I would love to say, on my own sobriety journey from the last 6 years, that I was past that. But every once in a while, it still pops up. It still pops up as like, oh man, I'm not part of the team. I'm not part of the crew. And I mean, I don't know. Alcohol's a big one for that one, especially where we live in our country.
It's really strange. So one of the things that I realized through this process, and I was diagnosed with liver disease, so it became, a doctor and judges have told me you have to quit. That my masculinity was threatened because I didn't drink beer or whiskey.
Right.
It's
Can you really be a man
bizarre
if you don't drink whiskey or beer? Right.
I have this. I don't have it now, right? Because I know what a man is supposed to be now. Run amazing businesses. I have an amazing family. I have amazing kids, and I'm in a healthy way. So I know these things now, but subconsciously, being able to slam a beer or chug a beer or take a shot of whiskey is in our society, to a lot of people, the mark of a man. It is
Absolutely.
a hair on your chest, right? This is what we were taught growing up. And, when you start studying neuro-linguistic programming and high flow coaching and mindset and all those things, you realize, oh shit, I've been brainwashed to think that poisoning myself is the correct path.
Let's stay on that topic for a second, because I also want to address people that are listening or watching that maybe don't struggle with alcohol, because alcohol is not the only addiction, right? Alcohol is also not the only addiction that we as men, I would say, this is my opinion, but I want to hear your opinion, that we as men are told that we need to do. As an example, I am a single man. So what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to go have sex and conquer as many women as possible.
Yes.
That's part of being a man. And that is, at least for me, I'll just speak for myself because I'm always vulnerable on this podcast, and I'll be vulnerable right now.
Womanizer is
For
part
me,
of being a man.
that has been a bigger addiction in my past than alcohol.
I will say that I've had that addiction as well, for sure. I am super fortunate to have an amazing wife and two amazing kids, and my wife's been there for me the entire time through this. In different ways. I'm not going to say that it's always been roses, but she's been there. We've been married for 17 years, but prior to that, and I didn't get married until I was 31, almost 32. I lived that life like 100%. There's 7 days in a week, so there's 5 women in my life. Right? That's just the way that it was, and that was the mark of a man. And that's you get to sit around the proverbial campfire and tell your war stories of conquering whatever it was you conquered. And that was part of it for sure. And it's, there's a point that you have to look back at the damage that you've done to other people, forgive yourself for doing that. And, if you can find those people and make amends with them, it's helpful. But I think that, making amends to the people that are closest to you is really is what you have to do, right? Because you're still living with those people.
Yeah, it makes me think of something that you said earlier, and that is just this whole idea of when you're in business and you're drinking and you're out closing deals and you're an entrepreneur and you're starting these new businesses, and that's how men connect, right? Like go drink, go play golf, go have sex with women and talk about it, right? Those sort of things. It's all the same thing, right? It's okay, well then maybe if I can't go drink with these guys, then I'll go tell my conquering stories, right? Or some other manly activity that I can do. So I'm curious from your perspective now, living a sober life, and we'll get more back to your story if you want here in a moment, but how do you now deal with those? Well, two-part question. Number one is, you started answering this earlier, and I'd love to hear your thoughts more. You said something to the effect of, this idea of being a man, right? Where this idea of being a man is drinking and having sex with a bunch of women and maybe other things, right? So now, as a person who's been sober for a long time, written a book about it, becoming an expert on it, but still successful in all these other ways, now how do you view what being a man is?
So in the book and in my gym, we call ourselves gladiators, right? So in the book, it's the mindset of a gladiator. And I chose that for a lot of reasons. That phrase gladiator means a lot to me. When a gladiator first starts training, they're geared up. They've got all this armor on. They've got shields, right? But the best gladiators, they just have a sword and some leather, right? And that's really what we're trying to do. And we're trying to just make sure that we disarm all of those layers of shield so that we can be the best performer that we can. And I like the fact of doing it in front of an audience, right? So, if I'm just doing it for me, eventually you get there. You have to just do it for you, right? That is one of these key components of self-awareness, do it for you, self-love, all of those things. But it gets to a point that that's just not enough. And so you do it for others. And I don't even know where I got this phrase, but learn, do, teach, right, has been a philosophy that I've had my entire life. Is I'm going to learn how to do something, I'm going to do it, and then I'm going to teach others how to do it. So that's an important aspect of life to me. And I've lived enough of my life as an addict, trying not to drink, not understanding what sobriety was like or what it could be like, because I had a relationship with this substance that was, it was the most important relationship in my life, hands down, right? It was more important than my kids. It's more important than my wife, obviously, or I wouldn't have done it, right? Because they were asking me not to. So,
well, and there's, I guaranteed that there's people listening and watching right now that have something that is the most important thing in their life, whether it's alcohol or drugs
right.
or sex or overeating or shopping or whatever it is.
Yes.
Some
And that's
sort
what
of
I love about
addiction,
AA.
and they don't see it.
AA helps you see it, right? But for me, AA didn't help me stay there. Right. And for me, I saw it. I was functioning. I didn't care. Right. I held alcoholic as a badge of honor. Right. Yeah, of course I'm an alcoholic. I'm a man. Like, of course I drink every day. That's what I do. Right. Like it was
I had a friend, before that, like before they got into AA, what they would always say is, well, yeah, AA is for quitters.
Yeah.
That's what they always used to say.
the
They're like,
joke.
I know I'm an alcoholic, I'm functioning and I'm doing everything else, but AA is for quitters.
Right.
So what do you say to somebody like that that's listening or watching right now?
So they don't want to get sober, and that's okay. Right. They live their own life. For me, smart recovery was a much more important function in my life to help me get sober. So I coupled a lot of things that I learned from AA, a lot of things that I learned from SMART, and I think that they both have their wonderful aspects and they both have their downfalls. And I coupled that with Recovery Dharma and everything that I've learned about coaching and cognitive flow and neurolinguistic programming and all those things. And just really quickly, I think AA does a great job of getting people that don't realize that they have a problem, but I don't think it's long-term solution. I think smart recovery is wonderful, but I don't think for an addict that, that smart recovery has an abstinence, it's not an abstinence program. You can try to do moderation. They're not going to tell you that you need to do that. Maybe it's because you need to come to that on your own terms. Mm-hmm. But I don't believe that for an addict, moderation will work. I think you're always going to go back to that slippery slope and, find yourself behind bars eventually, right? That's just what's going to happen. So, yeah. And then Recovery Dharma, what I loved about it was the opening your mind and starting to really think about reprogramming your subconscious to, I don't have to live like this. Or the couples that I put together. And then, what I've learned in coaching young boys and girls to get into the boxing ring and overcome those challenges, coupled all those things together to put this book together for what I would call is just a bunch of tools described in different ways, and a couple of mindsets that are just slightly different than the norm.
I love that. And I want to go back to something that you said a little bit ago as well. And I don't remember exactly how you said it, but you basically said, the strongest gladiator can be the person with just a sword. Mm-hmm. They don't necessarily have to have all the armor or anything else. And what I think of is there's plenty of stories throughout time where that's true, right? You go all the way back to David and Goliath and all you had was a little stone, right? And then you even take the Gladiator movie from 20 years ago or the one that's coming out, here soon. And there's scenes in there where they just basically get rid of everything and then they just have a sword and then they just go fight, right?
Yes.
Or I also think of, it's been a little bit now, but these last Olympics, there is a meme going around for a while with the sharpshooters, right?
Yes.
And then do you remember those? Yeah.
Yes.
And then you had the sharpshooters with all the equipment and all the different things and the gear and everything else. And then you had that dude, where was he from? Turkey, I think maybe. I can't remember.
Not sure. Yeah, I don't know. But
it was yeah, and he just goes up there and just with a gun and just, nails it, right? And I think of that often. I think that that's a really good analogy for addiction when you just brought that up. Because at least for me in my own life and the people that I've talked to that have struggled with addiction in the past, it's like we are this true, authentic gladiator underneath, but we feel like we need to add the alcohol armor, or the sex armor, or the success armor, or the private jet armor, or the travel armor, or the adventure armor, whatever the hell it is, that we're not comfortable enough in our own skin as men. So we feel like we need to add all of these other things, which really are just covering up insecurity, right? When you take it all down, maybe that guy doesn't have any maybe he has some strength, but he's lost it among all this armor and everything else, instead of just going out there with a sword and fighting.
Yes. And the analogy goes down to, as addicts and whatever it is, what we're really doing is just numbing our emotions because we don't know how to deal with them. Right. We have nobody is teaching us, unless you're in some kind of program. And I've been in and out of programs my entire life, how to deal with emotions, and how to sit through them and recognize them. And when you have a substance that you can take and they all go away, right? Then you just have two emotions, right? I joked all the time, like I only had two gears, really happy and really pissed.
Yeah, I relate to that for sure.
And that was all I had. That's all I knew how to do.
I have a question for you. So it seems like in today's world, we have kind of one of two camps as far as this goes, where we have the, ignore all your well, let's start with the first one. Medicate your emotions.
Yep.
Because because I don't know how to deal with them, with alcohol, drugs, sex, whatever, like we've been talking about. Then there's another option of kind of this, I'm going to use the word stoic just because a lot of people, I think, use it inappropriately these days, where it's like this stoic, that's in quotes, by the way, if you're listening to this and not watching, quote unquote stoic idea that, I just push through my emotions, right? I don't deal with them. I just go stronger. It's all the guys that are like, just get into the gym for 4 more hours and it'll work everything else out. Like, I mean, you own a boxing gym and you know that it's not just boxing. Like, you have to work on your mental attitude, your spiritual attitude, and everything else. You can't just work on your body.
It is more mental than it is physical.
100%. So
100%.
You have this idea of like, I'm just going to push through my emotions, or I'm totally going to medicate my emotions. And then you have maybe the third category, which is like, I'm going to sit around in therapy and sing Kumbaya for the next 30 years and not actually ever, like, I'm going to talk about my emotions and I'm going to bring them up. And it's just going to be this, but it's just going to be this emotional thing always. And I'm never going to move past anything. Right. So this is a long-winded way of asking you a question. It seems like those are the three camps, and none of those, in my perspective, are healthy at all, especially for a man. So what I want to know is, from your perspective, especially as a sober man who's also very successful and everything else, how do you, as a man, deal with those emotions without picking one of those unhealthy outlets that I just discussed?
Somewhat of a challenging question, and I'll try to summarize the answer. First thing that I had to do, obviously the recognizing and everything else, but I had to, and I'll reiterate, I was high functioning, right? And I'm talking to high functioning addicts, or at least functioning addicts, right? Maybe not high functioning, but at least you're living your days. You're executing everything that you need to execute, but you still have this problem.
To clarify for everybody, unless you don't know what high functioning addict means, it just means basically what I hear you saying. We're not talking about the bum on the street or the homeless person or the houseless person or whatever a politically correct word I'm supposed to use these days. We're not talking about the person on the street that is just so on meth that they literally are not in reality anymore. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the businessman that's going to all the different business events, that owns a business. If I could say business a couple more times.
Or woman, I think, in this case, right? Because I know women.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. And they are still accomplishing what they're accomplishing. They're still running businesses. They're still good in their families. Like, they could still be a good husband, a good wife. Like, all of these things could be happening, but all of the shit is underneath the surface, right? That's what you're talking about.
Yeah. So for me, I really had to, and I'll tell you, the book that kind of started my path was The Body Keeps the Score. And I had been struggling for years with addiction and trying to quit and all those things. And that's when I started my EMDR sessions. And I've done about 150 EMDR sessions to process some of the traumas that I've had in my life. And those are across the board, right? I've had, I'm adopted. I was born with a different name than I have today. I've got stepbrothers and stepsisters. There's, some sexual abuse in there. And I was, been in lots of car accidents, lots of trauma in my life that I had to unpack all of that. Because what I realized I was doing is I was just suppressing all of that. So, that was, and I'll tell you that I got probably pretty strange for about 6 or 8 months of going through that process of unpacking all of those things in my life. And it was a very volatile
what does that mean,
time.
Strange?
I think, the slipping between subconscious and conscious behavior, trying to live a life of awareness and those kinds of things, and then kind of flipping back and forth between those two mindsets is challenging, right? And you're trying to get into this world where, and I believe that to live a life of sobriety and happiness, that you have to be aware that that's what you're doing almost all the time, right? And in those mantras of I'm a sober man, I'm a sober gladiator, this is I love and respect myself, are what's going to get you past those triggers when they happen, and not even past the triggers. After a while, those triggers just kind of disappear, right? I would have a panic attack driving home from work because I had to pass a gas station and I had stopped and gotten 2 tall boys every day of my life on my way home, right? I go to the post office every day of my life to drop off envelopes and pick up checks. And there's a Hooters between me and the office and the post office. And I would stop by there, and this is 10:30 in the morning, and I would frequently stop and have a shot, right? So, and I had to do all those things every single day. And you'd literally have panic attacks just driving past a place that you would stop. So I had to figure out how to unpack all those things and figure out why those things were happening to me. After I got through the physical withdrawal, right? And then you live in this pink cloud for a little while of everything's great. And this is when I found pause, what post-acute withdrawal syndrome is. And that's when I realized every time I had hit that moment in my trying to become a sober person, that's when I would fail. Right? I would get into this, I would go through withdrawals, I would talk my doctor or whoever into, hey, can I drink occasionally? I want to feel like a normal person.
Right, exactly. I knew that was coming. Absolutely.
Right? That's all I want to do. I just want to feel like a normal person when I go out. I don't want to have people look at me funny.
Right.
And I don't think they are. I mean, the drunks are, right? Like, oh, you don't drink? Like, that's weird. Even, it was probably 5 years into me trying to quit before my mother stopped buying me a fifth of Crown Royal for my birthday and Christmas. Right? Like, Mom, this is real. I can't do this. This is going to kill me. You like, I know that you don't mean, I know that you mean well, but this is a problem.
Yeah. Well, people don't take it as a problem because it's such an accepted addiction in our world, right? I mean, there's a lot of accepted addictions. One would be alcoholism, which I always find really fascinating that, I don't want to go on a soapbox here for a second, but the majority of the country of the United States still has weed outlawed, but alcohol is legal.
Yeah. And cannabis is I believe alcohol is a good medicine for some things. And I think cannabis is a better medicine for most things. Right?
Yeah. And it causes a lot less problems. So again, without getting on a soapbox here, it's just, it doesn't matter though. My point with that is that is so accepted, right? Whereas I still talk to a lot of people about weed and they're like, oh my God, that's terrible. That's drugs. And you're going to start doing meth and everything else. I'm like, no, you're not.
Yeah.
First of all, and you are a high functioning alcoholic. So don't give me that shit. You just drove behind the car the other day and fucking hit a deer. Like, right. Are you serious? Right. But my point is, I know for myself, when I've gone through addictive tendencies, no matter what the addiction is, we convince ourselves. And if society agrees, man, that one's a hard one to break.
Yes.
Right.
Almost impossible. Like the statistics on somebody quitting and not relapsing are outstanding. And I've seen a couple different ones. I've seen it as low as 6, less than 6% of the people get sober and stay sober.
Wow.
Is one of the statistics that I've seen. So
I have a question for you. I want to go back to your story because I thought it was a really good one where let's just take the example of you driving by the gas station where you would normally pick up alcohol, right? Let's go back to what we talked about before. So you could go the whole like, I'm just going to ignore my emotions and this panic attack and what my body's trying to tell me, which clearly you didn't, because that's not helpful, because it just comes back stronger, right? It comes back and, it starts as, well, I'm a little nervous, and then that turns into a panic attack, and then that turns into a heart attack, then that turns into death. That's just how that works, right? So you obviously can't do that. You didn't stop and get the alcohol, so you didn't medicate it away. You didn't go to, a therapy cry circle and, talk about that. So how did you do it? Like, how did you actively feel how difficult that was and just accept it, but fight through it at the same time?
Yeah. So there's a few things that I had to do. One, I did go to the cry circles, right? I went weekly, which I learned, as a later adult, that the cry circles are addiction as well, right? For a lot of these people. They're there
Fight Club.
every single day.
Remember Fight Club?
Yes.
The movie and the book?
Yeah.
Right? For everyone that doesn't remember this movie and book, go back and watch it because it's such an amazing movie. But the other thing that's really important to know about this book and the movie, either one, is that the main character gets addicted to addiction groups. Because as an addict, I just want to get addicted to whatever's going to numb my pain. And all of a sudden, if that becomes the cry circles or the victim circles or the AA meetings or whatever, you can use whatever you want for that, right? People use religion, they use church, they use whatever it is to actually medicate and not deal with the shit going inside of me. Now, that being said, I'm just going to make a quick note, and you didn't say this, but I'm going to say it. I'm not against all these groups, so don't hear me wrong. I'm actually for all these groups because, like you said, I think that 12-step is probably still the best group to help somebody become aware of the problem that they have and start working on it, right?
Yes.
So I'm fully for that. I'm also fully for therapy. I've done plenty of therapy, cry circles, all that sort of stuff myself, because how else do you deal with the trauma from childhood like you had of starting to drink when you're 3? Like, you have to have somebody who's trained to help you get back there to unload that first. But then once you go past that, and then you're at a point where you're like, okay, I'm past that now. Now I'm driving by this gas station. What does that look like?
Yeah. So it's a handful of things that I had to do, right? One, studying cognitive flow, understanding neurotransmitters and dopamine receptors and all of those things. So meditation played a huge role. Talk therapy played a huge role. EMDR played a huge role. One of the things that I have this in the book is I made a dopamine chair at my house and my office. So it was very common for me to, when I would get angry at something or something wasn't quite going my way, it was totally common for me to just stand up and walk. I had, at my office, I make the rules. So it was,
you do whatever you want.
I had, always had beer, always had whiskey in the office, and there's, literally Hooters across the street that I could always go. So if those emotions would hit, I get angry or frustrated, I would literally stand up and go get a shot, go get a beer, go to the bar and blow off some steam, whatever I needed to do. And that was gone for me. And I realized that those moments would start escalating, and I would get into, rage and hate and all these kinds of emotions that weren't bad. So anytime that I didn't say I wasn't going to drink, right? I would just say, if I think I'm going to go drink, I got to sit in this chair for 5 minutes. Right. And if I sit in that chair for 5 minutes and I still want to go do it, right. But I had to sit and be calm for 5 minutes. So for me, it was, can I sit and be calm for 5 minutes? And if I couldn't, then I knew I had another issue. And that gave me the focus to sit and try to calm my body before I made any kind of decision. Right. And that was probably one of the most healthy things that I've ever done for me or anybody else in my life.
So simple too, and so brilliant.
Yes.
I was listening to somebody talk the other day, and they were talking about they were talking more of sexual addictions, but I think it applies to any addiction. And one of the things that he was saying is that the way that the brain works and what gets flooded in the brain, he said almost every single time in 15 minutes it's gone.
Yeah.
No matter what it is. So just the idea of sitting in that 5 minutes, and I'm just going to give a meditation practice, which, I don't know what your meditation practices is, but a lot of people, from my experience, hear meditation and they're like, I don't know, I don't like all this goofy woo woo whatever stuff. Here's the simplest meditation practice I've ever heard in my life, and that is just focusing on your breath. And literally, as you're breathing in and breathing out, you can even just say it like, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. That's the simplest meditative practice I've ever heard in my life.
Yes.
And I also just heard one recently as well, where you just say whatever state you want to be in. So if I just say calm, relaxed, chill, calm, relaxed, chill. The other day, I was getting aggravated about something. I don't even remember what happened. And I was on my way home driving. And all I did is I turned off all the media. I turned off the radio. I turned off the podcast. I turned off everything. And I just repeated that to myself. And I did it for, like you said, about 5 minutes. My heart rate came down. I felt calmer. The little butterflies in my stomach disappeared just from saying like calm and focusing on my breathing. That's
Yes.
all meditation is. It doesn't have to be complicated.
Yeah, I've got a couple of topics there. One, and it took me a while to correlate these things. We teach, and I'm a certified breath coach, right? So we teach box breathing and the 4-8 breathing at my gym, right? The 4-8 to help lower your heart rate, and the box breathing to help you overcome if I'm feeling nervous before I get in the ring. I want to manage that fight or flight response. Turn those over into my sobriety coaching, right? And then and I don't take many coaching clients in Reclaim Sobriety, but one of the requirements is, and I recommend this for anybody in the planet that's struggling trying to learn how to meditate, is a Muse headset or any other kind of neurological headset that you can put on to help you learn how to meditate, and not even learn how to meditate, but just accept the fact that that's what you're doing. Because I've talked to a lot of people that say, well, I just don't know how to meditate. And I'm like, well, I think you do. You just don't have anything that reinforces the fact that you're doing it. So the headsets help reinforce that you're getting into the spot to where you can start really programming your subconscious and learning how to practice gratitude, learning how to practice calm, learning how to do those things.
I was reading a book the other day, and what the guy was talking about is he was talking about exactly what you just said about how a lot of people are like, well, I don't know how to meditate. He's like, you do, because you already meditate in your life. And he started listing examples. He's like, are you a runner? Do you like to go out and run and then you get in a groove? That's a meditation, right? Do you like to go out and garden? That's a meditation. Like, there are so many different things that we do in our daily lives already that are meditation, right? It doesn't have to be, again, it doesn't have to be this like either a guided meditation if this person talking to me and I think that they're funky and weird, or I just have to sit there and absolutely never think about anything and it takes me 2 hours just to get rid of my thoughts. Like it doesn't have to be that. It could be very simple.
Correct. And the headset for me was a huge, like night and day. I would put
so I'm not familiar with the headset. Does it just help block out?
No, it measures your brain waves. It connects to an app, so it plays the music, and it gives you, and it sounds so silly when you say it out loud, it gives you rewards for whenever your mind is calm. So, the one that I like, it's just a really calm, like babbling brook. And then as my mind starts to wander again, then birds start chirping more frequently. And that tells me to bring it back down. And it's just been a huge, huge help for me in so many different ways between the Muse headset and the Body Keeps the Score. And I'm not getting paid for either one of those. I think we're two of the pieces of the puzzle that really put fuel to my fire of, hey, I'm going to change who I am as a person. And it changed who I identify as and how I feel about myself.
That's
right?
Awesome. And even that was huge on it. We'll go ahead and add the links to the bottom in the show notes because you've given us so many good resources, and I'm going to add a lot of them. So as we, I want to come back to a topic that we kind of talked about at the beginning of the episode that we haven't really touched base on, and I'm going to give you my wording for something. Your wording might be different, but when I've talked to people in 12-step or other groups that are trying to get sober or are sober, I've always distinguished the difference between what I would call sobriety versus recovery. And that's just been my own language from my understanding, and you might call it something differently. But I've always pictured sobriety as I don't do the thing, right? I don't drink the alcohol. I don't take the drug. I don't have the sex. I don't overeat. Whatever it is, because that's, literally the definition of being sober, right? Is just lack of. Versus recovery means that I'm living in a healing modality where I'm doing the things that I need to do to grow to my next level, etc. It sounds like you kind of combine the two, but I guess my question for you is back to the whole, like, sobriety isn't fun, right? Like I'm missing out. I don't have the alcohol. I don't have the sex. I don't have whatever. So I guess I maybe just unpack that a little bit. First of all, how do you make sobriety fun, and how do you live more of that kind of recovery lifestyle versus just the lack of lifestyle? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So for me, living in recovery felt like I was still broken. Like I'm still recovering. Like, when the hell is this going to be over? It's this constant, always thing. So for me, sobriety and reclaim sobriety is like, well, let's take this back, right? Let's make sober be something that's fun and something that's cool and something that we want to do. And you can be, I'm here to tell you, you can live a happy, productive life sober, right? That's possible. I've seen it. I've done it. I have friends that have done it, and it shouldn't be this negative word in our life, right? So reclaim it, and then with that, you get to reclaim your joy and all those other things. One of the chapters and one of my core values is be authentic. And you live under the guise of being authentic when you're drunk, right? Because you're literally just your uninhibited self.
Because you're uninhibited. So you're like, oh, this is my true self because I can actually like say all the things that I never want to say in my life, that sort of thing, right? But is that really...
I don't think that it is, right? It's a version of you, and it's definitely something that's way down there in the gunk of your brain. But I don't think it's a true, authentic you, right? It's a highly chemically induced you. It's a dying you. It's a poisoned you, right? It's all of those things. So one of the core values is be authentic, which means just be true to yourself and be true to who you are. And I don't think you can do that until you've taken off all the armor from the trauma, and you can live a life and you can find joy and happiness in just the things that you're doing throughout the day and excitement, right? And entrepreneurship for me has been a big part of my life, all of my life. And I'm able to execute that at a higher level without the alcohol after some time in transition, right? Changing who I was. I've had to call clients and be like, hey man, I can't take you to Amsterdam for the week, right? Right. I can't do that. So I'll buy the tickets and you guys have a great time. I'll even put a rep on the plane with you guys to entertain you, but it can't be me anymore. So learning how to deal with that emotions, learning how to be your authentic self and be weird and goofy with it and just pull the tape off. And what you'll find is that people love that version of you way more than they ever loved the drunken idiot, pulling in with the music too loud at 4:00 in the morning and fumbling with your keys to try to get in the house.
For sure. And not that this needs to be about celebrities, but I love following celebrities online that have gotten sober and stayed sober. And you can watch it in their talent, whether it's movies that they're making or music, etc. And I think it's a really fascinating story. I would actually love to see a documentary about this one day. I've never even heard of one. Maybe it exists. Yeah. But I'd love to see a documentary that just shows how acting changes, how their music changes, just how their actual talent changes. Because I know a lot of people in that industry, and including even myself running a podcast and everything else, it's very easy to want to get drunk or get high or whatever else to try to lower the inhibitions, to try to, be more open of whatever you're talking about, et cetera. There's plenty of podcast hosts and everything else that are fucking high every single time they record a podcast, right? Yeah. Because they want to lower it. And honestly, it's tempting for me to do it here because it's such a vulnerable podcast and I'm always sharing stuff about my life. And,
Yeah.
that I'm like, maybe I should lower my inhibitions a little bit and get high and do this. But it, as much as it helps creativity in some ways, right? You look at a lot of musicians in the day and they've used weed and other things to be able to, excite that. But at the end of the day, like I just don't see how, if you need something else besides yourself to live your authentic self, is that really your authentic self, or is it just masked with whatever you choose to mask it with?
I think it's masked.
I do
That's
too.
my opinion at the moment, right? I've got the white beard to prove my age, right? And I've been through some stuff. So a chemically induced you is not the best you. And I can make arguments for the creativity and the medical, right? I mean, cannabis was a big part of my recovery, right? When I was really trying to figure out how to become a sober person, I learned how to use cannabis as a medicine, not recreationally,
For sure.
right? To have something that lowered that anxiety so that you could sit and feel those emotions and understand them. And I think cannabis' best use is for that.
And
Besides
it's
pain
no
mitigation.
different. It's no different than legal drugs, right? Legal drugs can be used both. I mean, it's different. That's not what I mean. What I mean is legal drugs can be used the same way. They can either be used in a very healthy environment to try to help you with whatever it is, body, chemically, et cetera, that you're dealing with,
Yes.
or as they're used more often than not, especially in this country, as another addiction. But it's legal, so it's okay now, right?
After my liver diagnosis, my doc, he unfortunately passed away, was a good old boy, right? And I remember sitting in his office and we're trying to figure out if I was dying or not, right? And he's like, "There's nothing wrong with your heart, you dummy. But we got to figure out why your blood pressure is spiking to 190 over 110 and then dropping back down to, a normal and just, do this fluctuation." I was in withdrawals at the moment. We're trying to figure that out. And when we found out what I was in withdrawals, and we did the blood work and got my liver counts back, and he's like, "You're fucked. Like, you can go home and start drinking, and all these symptoms will go away, and you'll die in 2 years, or we can quit drinking today, and you could probably have a full recovery." And he immediately put me on Xanax. He's like, "I'll give you Xanax for the rest of your life if it keeps you from drinking." Okay, fine. Hated Xanax. Hated it. Do not like it one bit. But that just led to my next addiction of Xanax, sure. Right? Absolutely. And although the withdrawals from alcohol, which I've done 3 times in my life, I've had physical withdrawals from alcohol. The withdrawal from Xanax wasn't a whole lot better. Like it wasn't as bad as the alcohol, but it was really challenging to get off the Xanax physically and live a life without that too. So, and I don't know that I would have done it without CBD and cannabis.
Well, and I've heard the same story with every other addiction under the sun. It's all the same. I mean, I've heard this from people that have been overeating all their life and they finally start to eat healthy and try to get a good body and everything else. I've heard it from people that are sex addicts, from love addicts, from codependents, whatever. I mean, take codependency. That's another good example of one that's huge in society today, right? If you are completely, and I used to be a codependent, so I can speak to this. If you are so codependent that you're just needing somebody else and their validation, their approval, and make sure that they're okay so that you're okay, et cetera, that's basically what codependency is. And then all of a sudden you cut that and you're like, no, I'm not going to care anymore. I'm just going to do what I need to do and I'm going to live my own life, et cetera. That is, from my experience, just as fucking hard as cutting out alcohol. Because now all of a sudden because we're cutting out the same thing, right? We're just cutting out whatever is medicating us from the emotions that we don't want to feel and living our true authentic selves. That's my firm belief.
Yeah, on the mental addiction, absolutely, I agree that unfortunately alcohol has a physical, addiction property.
Oh, for sure, absolutely. I was not trying to say that if you're drinking, 5/5 of vodka a day, that your body's not going to respond differently than if you stop being a codependent. That's not what I meant by that.
And again, I have a lot of people reach out to me in that position, and that is, you need to call your doctor. You need to call 911.
People have died by cutting it off.
Physical withdrawal, you need medical assistance. If you have to go through that, like if your liver has told your body, I need this to survive, it will try to kill you when you stop giving it to it.
Which just, I don't know, for anyone that's not convinced yet listening, the very fact that that even happens, shouldn't that be the concern? Even if you are not that addictive or you feel like you're high functioning, whatever that means, right? Yeah. Even if you feel that way, if you are ingesting something into your system that you literally need medical assistance to get out of your system.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how else to say that. I don't know how else to say
but, you know, it
how
goes
insanely
so
crazy that it would be like me with every single meal that I make for me and my children, just putting a little bit of poison into it and we just all eat it. And they're like, oh, it's great. It's just a little bit of poison. That's fine. Are you going to feed a little bit of poison to your kids? Why would you feed a little bit of poison to yourself?
It is so bizarre. And I remember, you know, I was adopted and my mom was adopted as well. But my mother got to meet her biological father when I was about 10 or 11 years old. And, you know, got to meet him and all those things and got to spend time with him. But he was an alcoholic as well. And I recall him, you know, after multiple bypasses, after liver disease, all those things, still every morning getting up, sitting at, you know, 6 a.m., having a glass of scotch every single morning when I would be there. And this is the mindset that I was put into. I could quit and that might give me a couple extra years, but I'll be old anyway, so it doesn't matter. And I know other families that have that mentality, and it's just such a bad, because you don't have just a couple extra years. You have I'll be 50 next year and I might have another 30 to 40 years right now. If I kept on the same, 10 years ago, I was given 2 years to live maybe. Right. And now I'm looking at, I might have 30 or 40 more years left.
And let's say you don't. Let's say you live the exact same period of time, whether you're drinking alcohol all the time or you're sober. Which would you pick?
Now I would pick sober.
Right.
When I was drinking, I would have never said that.
Of course not. Of course not, because it's all downsides.
Yes.
Right? Like, I'm going to have to deal with this shit myself. I mean, I was dealing with emotional shit last night. And being sober sometimes fucking sucks when you have to deal with it, because I have to deal with it. Like, I can't just fuck it away, or I can't just drink it away, or I can't just, fill in the blank.
That is the key in my mind, is that moment when you identify as an addict or an alcoholic, then you're going to fail to that mindset. But if you identify as a sober gladiator, a sober man, or, a powerful executive, then you have the power to get through that stuff, right? Because you can ask yourself, is this what I would do? When you instill a set of core values into yourself and they're really instilled into you, conflicting those hurts more than almost anything else in the world. Absolutely.
And that's really in how you see yourself, how you view yourself, how you talk about yourself, et cetera. I often have thought about that just in 12-step groups, right? You walk into an AA group and you say, hi, I'm an alcoholic. And I've always had an issue with that, but I understand it. Like, I understand that the first step is me admitting that I have a problem, right? So if I'm going to walk in there, I have to admit that I have a problem and name it. So I understand why they do it. However, I think what happens with a lot of people is that then that becomes their identity.
Correct.
And now all of a sudden my identity is alcoholic. No. Your identity is not alcoholic. That is a part of you, sure. That is the addictive part of you that doesn't want to deal with your emotions and everything else, but that's not who you are. You're a sober gladiator.
Correct.
I love that.
And you've got to navigate through that, right? It's a path, right? For me, I've known I was an alcoholic since I was 10 years old, right? I had my first court order at 13, right? So this is just who I am. It's part of what I am, and it's acceptable to the whole world. And hell, it's not only acceptable, I get rewarded for my ability to conquer this thing and be able to do it and stand longer than other people. And I was one of the guys that, liquor wound me up. And I would, I could go 2 or 3 days without sleep pretty easy, and be drinking the whole time.
Yeah.
Right.
Which again, we're not being naive here. It comes with its advantages. Like, there's a reason people do this stuff, because there are advantages in the time, right? There's advantages to getting work deals done, to feeling loved and accepted, to whatever, right? There are advantages. It's not like, if there weren't advantages, no one would do any of it.
Right. And the ability to, I think one of the bigger hurdles that I had, I travel a lot and I travel by myself a lot. And when I was younger, I toured with music in the music industry. I was stage manager when I was younger. And I had a lot of pride in the fact that you could drop me in any city in this country with nothing in my pocket and I could figure out my way, because I knew that I could walk into any bar. I could get a bar back job or whatever, or I could sit down and meet somebody and strike a deal in a little bit of no time, right? I've got the confidence that I could walk into any bar in the country and do that. I don't know that I can do that today.
Yeah.
But I have other confidences that I'll figure it out. I can figure out a different path. I just don't have that path anymore.
So there's a lot of different people obviously listening and watching this podcast, a lot of different type of people is what I meant by that is. And I guess, again, this is not just for men. Women obviously struggle with addiction just as much as men struggle with addiction. I've never seen any stats on it, but there's one is not higher than the other. It's just that, maybe there are certain addictions that are higher men versus higher women, etc. But they go both ways, by the way. Walk into several 12-step groups, and depending on the 12-step group, you're going to see 80% men or 80% women, depending on the addiction. So women listening, don't think that you're off the hook here. You're just as addictive as we are. Specifically, though, to people, what is, again, everybody go into the show notes, buy his book. There's going to be a link there. There's going to be other information there about Ken. But as we wrap up, Ken, specifically, I would ask for men, but just really anyone dealing with addiction, or maybe even wondering if they have one, or wondering, and I would just say to those people real quick, and then I'll let you respond, but I would just say there's a good indication that you're addicted to something if you constantly go to it when you don't want to feel a feeling that you don't want to feel. So whenever you feel sad, if you constantly go to one thing, there's a good chance you're addicted to it. If you're constantly angry and you go to one thing, there's a good chance you're addicted to it. Whatever uncomfortable emotion, there's no bad emotions, obviously, but whatever uncomfortable emotion you have, if when you feel that, your brain is like, go here, there's a good chance that's an addiction. So I guess to people like that, Ken, men or women, but men specifically, what do you say to them? What's kind of the last, hopeful words you want to leave with them as we end here?
I want to talk about the men versus women first for just a second,
Sure.
right? This is my opinion. I think that it's acceptable for men to be addicts in public and women to be addicts in secret, right? And I think that's another problem, that just getting it open and out and talking about it, I think is really important for both people to know that there's a place, and there's lots of resources out there, and they're all different. So try different things. And that's a lot of fun, to try different things, right? That's always exciting. And that gives you some of the addictive fulfillment of trying new things. I would say I had a good friend of mine about 9-10 months ago come to me and said, hey, I think I'm struggling, right? I think I'm struggling. I'm like, then you probably are, right? And so I'm not sure what to do. I'm thinking about going to rehab. And I say, well, I can't say that you shouldn't or that you should, because I don't know enough. But if you're going to tell yourself, I'm not going to drink alcohol for the next 10 days, and in this moment, you really want to do that, and if you can't make it those 10 days, then you have a problem. You have a problem, right? I don't know how big the problem is. I don't know where you're at in the world, but if you cannot commit to not doing a task for 10 days, then there's a problem there. And then you need to start looking inward or going out to get help, right? And there's lots of help out there. AA, I think is probably better for somebody that doesn't know if they have an addiction to accept it, or if they're having a problem accepting it. For me, I always did. So Smart Recovery was a much better path for me, right? And if you have smart meetings in your area, wonderful. If not, there's Zoom meetings online. Read a recovery Dharma book is free. You can download it and read it. Recovery Dharma is a Buddhist-based practice. I very much enjoy it. It's got a lot of breathing exercises and stuff like that, and mantras. So there's resources out there for you. If you can't do 10 days without your drug of choice or activity of choice for whenever you're having a hard time, then it's time to start reaching out for help.
I love that, Ken. And, for anyone if anyone likes challenge that's listening to this or watching this like me, because pretty much anytime I need to motivate myself to do something, I need a challenge. I'm just a challenge type of guy. So here's the challenge for everybody listening to this. If you have an idea of what that thing might be, whether it is drinking alcohol, doing drugs, watching pornography, I'll say that one many more times, pornography, whether it is overeating, whether it's being in a love addictive relationship, being codependent, being a sex addict, whatever that thing is. And even if you don't want to use the word addict, don't use the word. But if there's something that you think you can't go 10 days without, I can't go 10 days without sex, I can't go 10 days without overeating, I can't go 10 days without alcohol, whatever, why don't you make it a challenge to do it for the next 10 days? And let us know how it goes. Write in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear how that actually goes for you. I know I've gone through personal challenges like that before, and sometimes they've been difficult, Ken. And it was a realization of like, oh man, I think I'm more addicted to this than I realized that I was. So I love that.
Absolutely. And for this guy, he wasn't drinking every day even, but he couldn't go 10 days, and he ended up, and he's 9 months sober now. Right. And he's happy and living life. But that's a great litmus test.
Addiction is much more insidious than we realize it is.
Yeah. And for those listening, water and food, don't try to go 10 days without those.
Breathing, yeah, when I said overeating, I didn't mean just like stop eating it altogether. That might be a little difficult.
Yeah. Well, I would say negative behavior, right? Things that are that potentially damaging you.
Right.
And all those things are potentially damaging you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Ken, thanks so much for being here today, man. This was really good. You left a lot of good stuff. And like I said, again, going down to the show notes. If you liked what Ken had to say today, please go out, buy his book, check out his resources, and subscribe. And send this to a man that you think it would be helpful for. Send it to somebody where you're like, yeah, I bet that guy couldn't go 10 days. see if they'll listen and be like, hey, listen to the challenge at the end. It might be interesting. So again, subscribe, appreciate all of you. It helps us continue this channel and keep going. So Ken, thanks again, man. Appreciate you being here. It was an honor.
Thank you so much, Josh. I appreciate it.
All right. So until next time, we'll see you later, you derelicts.